what we do. Sam Bradshaw breaks down a lot of things when it comes to opponents that Baylor's about to play and looking back at other things they do. He wrote this in the premium section. Post your TV rating questions. I have recently updated the data going back to 2011 and a few articles he's about to write on the new Big 12 and how leagues stack up and the USC and UCLA impact, etc. Sam Bradshaw joins us now on SicEm365 Radio and 365 Sports. Sam, I want to start with this one. Of the teams remaining in the Pac-12, we know who some of them are, larger cities, etc. Can you tell me who of the remaining 8 or 10 or whatever it is would be the best pickups for the Big 12 if that happens?
Well, assuming that all 10 of them are there, the pecking order, you have to start with Oregon. If you go back to 2013 and you look at Pac-12 conference games, so you don't have the big matchups against Ohio State or Notre Dame or whoever else it is to inflate the ratings, and it's just like versus like, staying within the conference, who's doing better. Oregon was far and away number 1, even above USC. SC was number 2, and then Stanford and Washington were 3 and 4. Stanford likely due to how well they were doing at the beginning of the decade with national television ratings. Obviously, Stanford's a smaller school and historically hadn't done as well as Washington. So Washington would probably be your next one up. And then after that, it really depends on who's generally successful. And from there, I'd probably lean towards Utah. They've been a consistent program for the better part of 20 years now. They're committed, and they'd offer a really nice rivalry with BYU to come in and really enhance the Big 12.
Is this something, though, without Los Angeles that would benefit the Big 12 to a point where they need to look west as opposed to east if they expand?
Well, I think the Big 12 is in the position you have to take valuable assets where you can get them. You know, if either the ACC or Pac-12 had schools that were available last summer, there's a chance they don't move on a couple of the schools that they ended up adding. So if you have the opportunity to add quality schools, you add them. It's very much, to quote the former Big 12 administrators, it's a digital footprint almost more so than a geographical footprint in terms of what you're looking at. Who turns on television sets, who can deliver those television ratings, and in turn deliver money to your conference. So assuming that the Big Ten's rate of SC and UCLA has put the Pac in a situation where those schools would benefit financially from a move to the Big 12, it would benefit the Big 12 to look west and take who you can get. There's no guarantees that the ACC is, one, going to lose any schools before that grant of rights is up. And even if they do, depending on the schools they have, it could be a situation where you would look back and wish that you'd reinforced your league with some solid additions from the West, because there's no guarantees that even if they lose schools, much like the Big 12 last summer, even if you lose some of your schools, you're not necessarily going to break up if it makes sense for the remaining members to stick it out.
Sam, what was of interest in pouring through these TV ratings and whatever else you chose to look at? What was maybe something that was surprising or notable about the Big 12?
Well, about the Big 12, I was surprised at how well the new Big 12 did relative to the Pac-12. I looked at some of the ratings, and I think for games they were involved in last year, I think I'm quoting it right, the Pac-12 was around 0.6 million a game, and the new Big 12 was around 1.5. But the Pac-12, Larry Scott did a lot of poor things in terms of the Pac-12 networks, but one of the things he did really well was he negotiated a really good contract for them in terms of exposure. They capped the number of times they had to appear on Fox Sports 1. They got a good amount of games on ABC and ESPN and got a lot of exposure that way. They had a lot more games on quality networks like ABC, ESPN, or Fox, and a lot fewer as a percentage on lesser networks like FS1 or ESPN2 or ESPNU. So if you just kind of got apples to apples with what networks you were appearing on, it would be pretty even. And that really surprised me because I knew that the Big 12 had more punch than the national pundits would give you in terms of what they could deliver. But to have it be that close, even before they lost SC, that was definitely a surprise.
Sam, what do you feel that the best end game would be for TV deals and conferences right now that aren't the SEC and Big Ten?
Well, the best end game for this is that ship sailed because we're moving towards consolidation, which is great for everyone's pocketbook because you're getting a lot more of the major brands playing each other, but it's not necessarily great for the sport because there's a lot of fan bases that are going to be cut out as a result of this. And there's a lot of relegation for reasons outside the competitive playing field going on. As far as an end game for the Big 12, ACC, or Pac-12, there's the opportunity to emerge as a clear number 3 conference and get the television windows that are available and get the money that's available as a result of it. As far as a favorable end game for anyone in those conferences, you're really hoping that an expanded playoff gets you significant access rather than the 2 big conferences taking their ball and going home.
What do you think, besides the obvious, if in fact there becomes a super conference, how many teams will they end up with, in your opinion?
That depends on the economics of the situation. I mean, back in 2016, the Big 12 remained at 10 because they would have lost money if they went bigger. I think super conferences make sense as long as it makes financial sense. You know, there's talk that the Big Ten might pass on Oregon and Washington because the number they're hitting with SC and UCLA and Ohio State, Michigan, and all of those big brands that they have, to where schools like Oregon and Washington might be diluted. You know, at that point, they just stay at 16 unless there's a different paradigm going on, such as like breaking off from the NCAA and getting more money that way by running things yourself and capturing enough brands to make it worth it nationally. So in the absence of some larger conferences taking their ball and going home kind of end game, I don't think you're going to see super conferences across the board. I think everybody's going to be governed by their own internal financials. If it makes sense to go 16, they'll go 16. If it makes sense to go 20, they'll do it. But I just think when you get into the SEC and Big Ten in particular, the number of schools that can move the dial that much, that can deliver that much value, there's not many of them. And without them, I don't think they go that big.
Sam, thank you, buddy. Can't wait till football gets here and starts talking about X's and O's with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Sam Bradshaw, SicEm365.com, data, stats, analysis of kind of the TV, and, of course, what he said earlier about Oregon and the numbers he brought up with them, among others as well. It's 5:19.